The Bible can be intimidating, even daunting. But when we approach it as a story, it suddenly becomes more accessible and more enjoyable. So let's take that approach as we look at 2 Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians, we saw that the believers there in Corinth were splintering and straying from the gospel that Paul had taught them. So Paul wrote 1 Corinthians to promote unity and to win them back. He reminded them of his teachings on marriage, singleness, orderly worship, and the use of gifts in the body of Christ. He reminds them of these things in the hopes that they will reunite and reaffirm their commitment to Jesus and his gospel. But how would they respond? We'll find out in 2 Corinthians. But first, the raw data. What was that, Gary? The graphic. Run the graphic again, the raw data graphic. Gary, oh, okay, you got a thesaurus. That's great, Gary. Learning some new words. Oh, you have another. No, go ahead. Is that all, Gary? One more? Okay. Well, the raw data, or whatever we're calling it today, is quite simple for 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians was written in 56 AD, just a year after 1 Corinthians was written. And it was written from the region of Macedonia. And it was written on the themes of suffering, comfort, reconciliation, and grace. Before we get into the story, we've got one more thing we've got to check on. It's map time. Corinth is very far south on the Grecian peninsula, where Macedonia is a region directly to the north. Okay, so here's the rest of the story between Paul and the Corinthians. Paul sent Titus to check on the Corinthians, and he was hoping to meet up with Titus in Troas. So Paul writes, "When I came to Troas to preach the gospel of Christ, even though a door was opened for me in the Lord, my spirit was not at rest, because I did not find my brother Titus there. So I took leave of them and went on to Macedonia." And there, in Macedonia, guess who shows up? Yep, Titus. Paul writes of their meeting there in Macedonia. "I am acting with great boldness toward you. I have great pride in you. I am filled with comfort. In all our affliction, I am overflowing with joy. For even when we came into Macedonia, our bodies had no rest, but we were afflicted at every turn, fighting without and fear within. But God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus, and not only by his coming, but also by the comfort with which he was comforted by you, as he told us of your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoiced still more." The Corinthians had indeed overcome their splintering and their straying, and this brought Paul great comfort and joy. In fact, he kind of goes off on it in chapter 7. So 2 Corinthians is largely about suffering, which is very much a part of this broken world. But he says just as much about comfort. Comfort from God and comfort from true and honest friends. Paul is not merely teaching the Corinthians intellectual and spiritual concepts. He's modeling them. Paul enters their suffering. He enters their pain. And if Paul entered the Corinthians' suffering, how much more does God enter ours? And if the Corinthians offered Paul comfort, then how much more does God offer comfort and joy to us. After he left Macedonia, Paul went and visited Corinth for what would be the last time. He was there 3 months. It must have been so warm, so welcoming. It was certainly comfortable and joyous. During his stay there in Corinth, Paul felt so at ease that he wrote the most important piece of theology ever written, the book of Romans, which we'll talk about next time. Hey, I make these videos because it's fun, but I also hope they're helpful. So you can increase my joy by liking this video and by subscribing to my channel if you want. Thanks.